Hello, scholars. I guess Arna wanted to hang out with you guys for a little while. My name is Dr. Karis Dillon, and the goal of this channel is to make academic subjects easier to understand. I know I've been gone for a while. I really apologize for that. I've been taking some time out for myself to really work on me. Yes, people in psychology do that quite often on a regular basis, but I've been putting out videos hoping that you're watching them and that you're doing a lot better in your classes and you're feeling confident and that it's going tremendously smooth for you. Personally, I've been dealing with people in my life that have been in my life, which seems like forever. And I had to reach some really hard lessons in life that people that you think are going to be supportive of you and that they know you don't really know you. So it's been hard to realize that even though people may say certain things in life, it's really important to look at their behaviors too, because if the behaviors aren't coinciding with what they're saying, there's probably a problem there. So I needed to go back to the drawing board and really look at what was happening in my life and what was making me feel very unhappy. And so I did that, and I put some major boundaries up in my life, and I'm feeling great. I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling more positive. I feel like I've progressed more, and I'm excited about life again. So super happy. I just celebrated my birthday. I am 44 years old, and for me, I don't know what this is. It's like a rebirth. If you notice, my husband has been putting out videos in algebra, and he's going to work his way from algebra all the way up. Algebra 2, then comes geometry, trig, calc, pre-calc, and then calc. He's been amazing and so supportive of this channel, and he's becoming part of it, which excites me a lot. He actually bought me a ring light like most YouTubers have. I just kind of threw it out there for my birthday and boom, he gets me a light. I was so excited. So with that though, let's get started. In the last video, we looked at groups and leadership. In this video, we're going to look at deviance and crime. So let's begin. Now, deviance is probably not a term you hear on a regular basis, but essentially it means a violation of cultural norms, social norms, or established laws. Deviance tends to have a negative connotation with it. As we've talked about the different theories of sociology, functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism, when we take a look at functionalism in relation to deviancy, functionalists are going to state over and over again that deviance is absolutely necessary in society to bring about social change. Is that totally the case? Kind of up to you, but that's what functionalists would say. Now, it's not always easy to identify what deviant behavior is in society. Whether or not somebody is labeled deviant can depend upon where they live, who is doing the labeling, and the person that's conducting the behavior and what that behavior looks like. As time passes, social norms can definitely change. Now, as an example, when I grew up, and probably more my mother growing up, cigarette smoking was seen as completely acceptable and was amongst the norm, almost a norm in US society. We didn't understand secondhand smoke. We didn't understand those things. So when science came about and we recognized the damage that it was doing to the lungs, that's when the social norm changed. No longer was smoking seen as acceptable within society. And along with that came laws that changed the way that we could smoke indoors, outdoors, and cars, those types of things, and to protect children. Every society has what are called social controls. Social controls are ways that people attempt to reinforce social norms. And I know you've seen them before. A social control is meant to maintain order in a society so that people follow rules and society is not in chaos. The way or the means that people attempt to kind of keep this social control are called sanctions. There's two types of sanctions. One is positive sanctions, and the other one is negative sanctions. So positive sanctions can be considered rewards, kind of for reinforcing social norms, and they're positive. People enjoy them. Negative sanctions can be considered punishments for breaking or violating social norms. Sanctions can be positive or negative, but they can also be formal and informal. Now, formal sanctions are ones that are publicly recognized. If a high school student is caught smoking in the bathroom at school, that school will probably bring out the rules of the student handbook and explain why that student needs to be punished. One reason that formal sanctions exist is to keep order, but also to make certain expectations and rules known to those that partake in the environment. Informal sanctions tend to arise given personal interactions. It's not against the law to belch out in a restaurant, but diners are probably going to be pretty upset with you. They may even glare at you or say, knock it off, or something to that extent. And when they do that, that's known as an informal sanction. Most people don't recognize how many social norms they follow without even thinking about it. Having children and trying to teach them what's acceptable in public places when they're young, you start to begin to realize how many social norms we follow and don't even think about it each and every day. Now let's switch our course here a little bit and look at deviance from the three sociological perspectives. And we're going to start with functionalism like we always do. There are many sociologists, and you'll know this from the other videos, that develop theories about deviance under the guise of functionalism. One of these sociologists was Emile Durkheim. Durkheim was the main sociologist to convey the importance of deviance with bringing about social change. He believed that when laws needed to change due to society's events that come up or things that kind of rock the system, deviance was an integral part of this process. And I think as a nation, we're kind of, coming up against that right now. As an example, I'm sure you've probably studied the civil rights movements of the 1960s. Many Americans recognize that Plessy versus Ferguson, which is the Supreme Court case of 1896, was extremely outdated and immoral, and that separate facilities for blacks and whites was ridiculous, and people knew that. Demonstrators took to the streets, they broke the laws by entering public places, sitting down at lunch counters, and demanding that they be served. When police came in and began reacting with violence, people saw this on their TV sets, and this is where public opinion started to greatly change on this law. People thought, why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. It was in 1954 that the Brown versus Board of Education finally overturned this whole concept of separate but equal, and blacks and whites and all individuals could go into any place, any public place at all. So functionalists would say that even though that act of defiance against law was deviant, at first it was necessary to bring about positive social change. A second sociologist who believed in functionalism was Robert Merton. He created what he called the strain theory. This theory stated that people either have socially acceptable goals or they don't. When those that have goals that are not socially acceptable, they often find ways of cheating or going around the system in order to achieve those goals. Now, Merton gave 5 reasons or ways that people with socially unacceptable goals deal with not being able to achieve what they want. The first one that he talked about is through conformity. The individual realizes that they can only achieve their goals up to a certain point through means that they find or that others find socially acceptable. This means that an individual, they reach only the goals that they can and follow within society's norms. The second one is through innovation. This means the individual will go around the system. Innovation comes about through criminal or a deviant way to reach those goals outside of society's norms and laws. The third is through ritualism. Individuals will lower their goals over time until they reach something that's socially acceptable. This person tends to see the reality of the situation and lowers their goal to a more realistic point. The fourth is retreatism. This means the person refuses to even acknowledge society's norms and they don't want to take part in it. Now, as an example, a person that's homeless that chooses to be homeless because they don't want a part of society would be an example of this. Now, I realize most homeless people don't choose to be homeless. I realize it comes upon them, but that's an example that I wanted to provide. The fifth is rebellion, which means the individual doesn't acknowledge society's norms and creates their own. Individuals that support anarchy and push for ways to overthrow the system would be included in this group. Now, another functionalist theory that discusses deviance is called social disorganization theory. This theory contends that those from poorer communities with a lack of social ties are more likely to take part in criminal activities compared to those that are wealthy and already have resources. They're looking to get those resources from another means. Now, this doesn't mean this theory is true. It's just a theory about deviance and crime. This theory also states that a person is not born a criminal, that they learn to become one over time. The last functionalist theory we're going to cover in relation to deviance is from the sociologists Henry Mackay and Clifford Shaw. This theory is called cultural deviance theory. The cultural deviance theory states that when society accepts cultural and social norms of the lower class individuals, and that has to do with SES, socioeconomic status, this can cause increases in crime. The poor generally tend to live in the inner cities, and these two individuals went to Chicago and they observed the things that were happening in the inner city. And at that time, there were race issues as well as poverty issues. The two sociologists looked at those two issues because they correlated with one another and found that culture and the ideals and the social norms within that inner city were different from that of the suburbs. All right, so we're moving off of functionalism and then we're moving on to conflict theory and how they see deviance as well as crime. So when conflict theory looks at deviance, they look at it quite differently than functionalism. Conflict theory would state that economic factors are directly related to deviance and crime. They don't believe that crime is a necessary evil. They believe that those systems, whether they be government, education, they begin as having inequalities towards those that are poor, race, age. Now, Karl Marx, I'm sure you've heard of this before, he is a German economist and philosopher, and he looked at the wealthy, and keep in mind, he came about during the Industrial Revolution when this whole shift was happening. But he watched the wealthy who were the owners of the means of production. So these were the decision makers, and he labeled these guys the bourgeoisie. And he noted their relationship to the working class, the people that were laboring for them, and he saw that they exploited them so badly. He called these workers the proletariat. He surmised that eventually the proletariat would rise up against the bourgeoisie because the inequalities would get so great that they no longer would be able to enforce that dominant role or that dominant fight back from these individuals. Another sociologist that believed in the conflict theory in relation to deviance was Wright Mills. He labeled the wealthy and influential people, etc., people like politicians or celebrities or military leaders, he called them the power elite. He believed those at the top were few but extremely privileged. These individuals at the top decide what is deviant and what is criminal in society. Now think about this. The most wealthy people are creating the laws and they're creating what is acceptable and what's not. If you're in that position of power to create those laws, you are definitely going to get a kind of biased look at things. Your social norms are going to be different from somebody else who has a different socioeconomic class or religion or age. Now think about this. Look at all the celebrities that are out there. Take a celebrity and then take someone else that's not a celebrity, have them both commit the same crime and put them in front of a court system or jury. They're totally going to get different results. So the conflict theory also describes how crimes made by white-collar individuals, and those are more in the professional field, tend to cost the nation so much more than street crimes. So you're talking embezzlement, identity theft, those that more deal with in the professional realm, money, stock trading, exchanges. The crime that's created by these individuals is billions of dollars more than what we know as street crime. Street crime could be considered larceny, theft, motor vehicle, any of those things. Okay, so that was the conflict theory. Moving on to symbolic interactionism. So remember, they study the one-to-one interactions and some of the symbols within that culture. So symbolic interactionists study deviance by observing and researching how behaviors come to be viewed as deviant and unacceptable. So there's 4 theories that have been created by symbolic interaction, which include labeling theory, differential association, social disorganization theory, and control theory. So first, the first theory, labeling theory, states that individuals that are labeled deviant will eventually come to believe that they are deviant. This theory seeks to understand how we label one person as deviant and another not deviant. This theory also contends that people aren't labeled deviant because of the act that they do, but because of how the people react to it. This is why something might be considered deviant 20 years ago, but now it's not seen that way in modern society. Labeling theory also distinguishes between primary deviance and secondary deviance. So primary deviance takes place when social norms are broken, but there's not an impact on that person, how they view themselves or their interactions with others. Good example, you guys, littering. How many of you have been going down the street, you got an apple core, you fling that sucker out? Many of us do it. Many of us break that law. But have you looked at yourself and said, I broke the law. This is not good. I did a bad act. No, we don't tend to change that. And that's what we know of as a primary deviance. Secondary deviance is when a person breaks social norms or laws and is labeled as deviant by members of their society, and their self-concept begins to change because of it. So as the self-concept changes, they may continue breaking norms in rebellion of the people that labeled them that in the first place, and it can become cyclical and problematic. Another symbolic interactionist theory is named differential association, which was created by Edwin Sutherland. Now, Sutherland was concerned with the origin of deviant behavior. He looked at how groups learned as well as their social interactions to see where deviance kind of came about. This theory stated that deviance is learned from others that are close to that person. For example, if you're out and you go with a friend and you're like, okay, I'm sticking that candy bar down there. Your friend, whether or not they may agree with you at that point, the more they hang out with you, the more that they'll see that behavior as acceptable. Probably because that you're going to tell that person, this is why I do this, and they didn't do this, and they didn't do that. You're going to create blame for that. And over time, that's going to impact that person that hangs out with you. It's going to impact the way that they see that. Sociologist Travis Hirschi is a symbolic interactionist who created the control theory. Now, I know you've probably heard me talk about the 3 sociological theories, functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. That this is not the same thing. It sounds like control theory, but it's not the same. So don't get those 2 goofed up. This is a symbolic interactionist theory. This theory states that the social bond between individuals and their community can directly relate to the involvement in crime. The less bonded a person is with their community, the more apt they are to commit a crime. Now, there's totally a difference between breaking social norms and committing a crime. Those are 2 different things. When someone breaks a societal norm, this means they can't always be punished for that. Social norms can be things that just people frown upon within the community. It goes against their values and belief systems. Crime is different because it's observed and there are formal sanctions that will serve as punishment. The most severe crimes are known as violent crimes, and these are dealt against a person or persons and tends to use that person may have a threat of force or actual force. Nonviolent crimes usually include theft or damaged property. So they don't include harm against the individual. If you want to know about some of the US's crimes and how bad certain cities are in relation to others, you can look at the Federal Bureau of Investigations because they collect data from law enforcement agencies and they publish this yearly in what's called the Uniform Crime Reports. Now, when you look at their data, this is only crime that's been reported. And so somebody's put this down and put this into the statistics and has sent this along. There's a lot more crime that happens in the United States than what's reported or observed by another culture. The US does attempt to gather statistics on crime that aren't reported to the US, and I think that's kind of cool. The US Bureau of Justice publishes the National Crime Victimization Report, which is data gathered via interview, usually via telephone, or they're doing actual interviews. So this report is really unique because it does gather data on demographics. They also give information on the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. They also give information on whether or not there were drugs involved within that or alcohol. So they give a lot more information than the FBI can or does. Lastly, the US divides up the criminal justice system into 3 different kind of systems. 1 is the police, 2 is the courts, and the correctional system is number 3. The police are a group of individuals that are trained and work to enforce order and law at the local, state, and federal levels. Now, the US uses the term federal law enforcement officer instead of federal police, and federal officers are either part of the ATF, the FBI, or Homeland Security. So these federal officers can only stay in their jurisdiction, which means they have to remain in federal issues. State police, they have to be concerned with state matters. Local police, local matters. That's where the US Constitution and our laws come in that state they have to stay within those bounds unless invited in by another party. The courts make up the second portion of the US criminal justice system. A court system deals with laws and it breaks them up into the federal, state, and local laws. So each of the court systems deals with those applicable laws. We know that the highest court in the land is the Supreme Court. We also have appellate courts. If people are unhappy with their decision, they can appeal to that next level, and that's part of securing your rights as an individual of America. So those cases that are criminal, they head to what's called a trial court. That usually will include a judge and a jury, and a majority of the time, the jury will state whether or not there's guilt or innocence, and the judge will come in with terms of punishment, those types of things. That's not always the case. There's states where that is different, and the jury will decide on punishment as well. Now, the last part of the criminal justice system is the correctional system, and that is made up of jails and prisons. Now, jails are different from prison because they're supposed to be more temporary. So those that have under a year usually will serve that out in a jail as long as they're not an enormous threat or something. Again, people might be in and out of that jail depending upon the severity of their crime, if they might threaten people in the future, that type of thing. Prisons are different in that they hold individuals longer than a year, and they need to make sure that those prisoners are safe, they keep them alive, and that they're fed. There's a lot of other things they do in that as well, depending upon their federal funding and their state funding. So what's kind of bad about our country, the US, we house more inmates than any other nation in the world, and that inmate population is continuing to grow. So we really need to look at something to help out that situation. Lastly, we're going to take a look at parole and probation, are the other 2 terms that need to be defined in relation to the correctional system. When an individual is paroled, they're let out of prison or jail with certain supervisions, and authority figures have to sign off that, nope, I don't think this person is a future threat to society. Probation is when an individual receives a different sort of punishment instead of prison. So sometimes individuals will serve out their time at home and can only move a certain distance within their yard before authorities are notified that they have broken the rules. So they might have ankle bracelets, or they might have other types of technology to make sure they are where they say they are. And that is the difference between parole and probation. So, okay, well, we're going to end our video concerning deviance and crime. If you like the video, please click that like button below and don't forget to subscribe. I hope you had an amazing day. It feels good to be back. I can't wait to get to know all of you. Keep on studying, and I will talk with you soon.